Step into the heart of Australian agriculture with Salt of the Earth Farm Stories, hosted by Darren Grigg. Through personal, on-the-ground conversations, Darren shares the voices of farmers from all walks of life. Each episode reveals the passion, resilience, and deep connection between people and the land, reminding us where our food comes from and who makes it possible.
I did a talk with a stock agency. The principal had identified that all his workers had never faced this. They'd never gone and had to tell people that they've got to shoot sheep. How do they deal with that?
We're back with the Unbreakable Farmer, Warren Davies. Right now, farmers across Australia are doing it tough. Some facing drought, others dealing with floods. Warren is on the ground and on stage, working right across the country, helping rural communities build resilience and stay connected. In this episode, he shares what's in his personal toolbox for overcoming fear and why staying connected to your community is so crucial. We talk about the importance of speaking up because, as Warren says, if you can't talk, you can't get support. We also hear about his awakening moment while working in disaster recovery and the wisdom that came with it. This is a powerful and timely conversation.
Basically, we're dealing with different things. Like one, we've got floods, we've got drought, crippling drought. And unless you've been to the Western Victoria and into South Australia, just don't realise how dry it is. But then having said that, from where you're from, Corryong, we've got friends up there, it's dry. And you don't have to go too far out of Shepparton, just over the Strathbogie Ranges to, past Euroa and bloody Mansfield and Murrindindi Shires. They're really dry, like, running out of water kind of dry. And you don't realise it until you get out and about. And it's having a massive impact on people because, some people haven't faced that thing, faced something like that. And interestingly, I did a talk with a stock agency in South Australia last week, and it was because the principal had identified that all his workers had never faced this. They'd never gone and had to tell people that they've got to shoot sheep. How do they deal with that? It's something probably learned in Western Australia last year around the live sheep export. A lot of stock agents, truckies and all, they've never experienced this because, the last time this happened was a long way down the track, and a lot of those people are now retired or not in the industry or whatever. So there's none of that shared wisdom to go, well, this is what you need. This is how you can support yourself through this. So you try and gain as much knowledge from conversation as you can, so you can try and impart something that's going to help different industries and that within those rural communities. So, yeah, but the drought at the moment, you don't have to drive too far over the border out of Victoria into South Australia to realise that, geez, this is bad. And even an inch of rain, and that's one of the things, Also, I talk about this disconnect between city and country, and you'll hear the weather reports on the Melbourne thing. Oh, they're going to get 10 mil of rain today. 10 mil of rain is not going to do anything. Like they need a couple of inches right now, and then they need an inch next week, and then an inch the next week. To even make any sort of indent into how dry it is. We're not going to say no to any rain, but at the same time, to try and get them back on their feet, they're going to need more rain than that. And then when you're getting service providers reaching out and saying, I don't know what to do now, we need some support. Well, they're the people that are meant to be supporting the people that need support. A lot needs to be done, and one of those, the cheapest and easiest thing that we can do is just talk about it and try and make sure people are aware of what's going on out there, and as well as whatever support we can throw at those communities that gets thrown at them.
And for Victorian farmers now, we have an extra thing with that fire levy thrown on them.
It's just hard. Look, and I try and stay apolitical because no use getting into that, because I think I've done that. I was school president here in Kyabram for a number of years, and they wanted to take classrooms away from us, and you try and pull that political line, and that, it's just like you're nearly belting your head against a brick wall. Which is, look, and that doesn't mean that you don't fight. That's, you don't fight for what you stand for, but at the same time, you've got to be very resourceful with the energy that you might have. Like I spoke to at that rally the other day, I spoke to farmers that had been up to 1 o'clock. that morning, still watering and feeding stock so they could jump on a fire truck and drive to Melbourne 4 hours so they could get to the rally by 9. Like that's not sustainable, that sort of fight. So, but when you consider, one farmer in the Bull Oak Shire that I spoke to the other day, this levy's going to add an extra $40,000 to their bills for the year. It's pretty hard to, in a year like this year, you could have picked a better year, maybe.
Can you imagine it? They've got a mortgage, they've got no feed, they're shooting animals.
Yeah.
They're only still just surviving.
Yeah.
And they get this extra tax thrown on them.
Yeah, that's right. And
Crazy.
that just adds so much pressure financially to people that are already financially struggling. It's something that we might not be going to change it, and I suppose they've got to recoup their money. They're trying to pay off debt, but it just seems to be targeted at the most vulnerable at this stage. And I think that happens across the board. Doesn't matter what it is. It's the most vulnerable that probably come out of it worse. And at the moment, farmers are very vulnerable at the moment with conditions that they're facing.
And what should we be doing as neighbours or friends of farmers, checking in on them?
No, just a phone call. I talk about our mental health toolbox and whether that's starting conversations with people or looking after yourself. And one of the things in both those toolboxes, one of the tools that we need is empathy. We need to be empathetic to ourselves. You've heard me talk about me belting myself up on the side of the road at Seymour saying, what the hell are you doing here? Well, I need more empathy for myself, but we need the empathy for the people around us. So even if you're not connected to agriculture, but you know someone that is, just being empathetic to this shit, that would be tough.
Yeah.
And maybe just giving a phone call, and it doesn't have to be, how are you? Are you all right? Just, g'day mate, how you going? What's going on? And give them the opportunity to be able to share their story.
Well said. And also you facilitate some really engaging workshops.
As I said, it's just evolved into something that I never ever imagined. So, doing keynote talks, I've done them in Canberra for government organisations. It's just friggin' mad. And now I do workshops, and one of the first workshops I did was for the Psychology Society of Victoria, and it was a group of psychologists from all over Gippsland. I'm thinking, same thing. Seed starts sprouting. What the hell are these mental health professionals? What am I going to say that's going to impress them? And the workshop just went so well. So now I do workshops as well. So I think if I understand why doing workshops is so important to me now, over the last 3 years, I've been really busy. So last year, and if you consider you take January out of the equation, because no speaking gigs happen in January and they stop about the 15th of December, I did 107 gigs last year in every state and territory of Australia. So it's about one every 3 days.
Yeah.
And the thing I was finding, I'd be doing, there was 1 year, 2 years ago where I think within 4 days I flew to Brisbane, to Adelaide, did a speaking gig in Melbourne, then flew to Sydney, back to Melbourne, then to Adelaide again, all in so all of a sudden I was feeling unfulfilled. You do something and then all of a sudden you get to a stage and then I was feeling unfulfilled because I was having no connection with that community. So one of the other things that my intentions are is if I go to a community, I spend a little bit of time there and engage and hopefully jag a school gig. So do some speaking at the school and then do a community event. So I cover the wider range of the community. But the other way I could achieve that was by doing workshops, spending 3 hours or 4 hours with a group of people and walking them through a journey of self-discovery more than about what my story is. And they've worked really well. I've just done one recently at Marcus Oldham College with the leadership group down there in Geelong, and it was great fun. I enjoyed it. Unfortunately achieved my 3 outcomes. I made them laugh, I made them cry, and I made them think. So it was a very vulnerable and emotional session, especially at the start, but that you don't know that's coming until you ask a question, and all of a sudden, if you've created the right environment, that's just going to come at you. And then you've got to think on your feet a little bit, because sometimes that does not work. But it did. And, so I do workshops as well, which is I'm actually doing one on the weekend with the CFA, doing a leadership workshop with them at their captain's conference. And, I've done few different talks with like those sort of organisations. So I pinch myself like to think, how the hell have I ended up here? Like, why am I doing this? Like speaking in Brisbane the other week at the sugarcane conference, I'm following on from Glenn McGrath. Like I'm thinking, really, you know, you realise where I'm from, don't you? You know, I'm a dairy farmer from Tongala in Victoria, and I'm here standing on a stage at the convention centre in Brisbane, and the bloke that I followed is the bloody one of the greatest Test cricketers that ever walked the earth. Like,
and don't forget you were that little school kid, up at the blackboard, struggling.
That's exactly right, and I just think, but one of the things I think I suppose my superpower, if I try and be, which I don't like doing because I'm really humble about what I do. But if I look into what my superpowers are, and I hate doing it, but if it is, it's because I'm authentic. Like, so we could do this podcast again, it'll be totally different. Yeah. You know,
but your story is very real, and the way you present it is
so
very
we could do this. You could ask the same questions, it'll be totally different podcasts. My talks are the same. Key messaging is really the same, and the way I deliver that. But the stories, like, because I could be looking out, because here's a little one of my secrets. So I've got a couple of little secrets that I share a few now, because I say to people, I'm implementing one of my strategies out of my toolbox at the moment. Can you pick what it is? And everyone's looking at me. You're moving your hands, because I move my hands a bit. No, because it's just the anxiety. And I said, no. Anyway, they can never guess it. And I said, well, I'm actually standing here with my toes curled up on my boots. And they go, well, how's that a strategy? I said, well, you stand up and try and run out of the room.
That's right. Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
And that's one of my strategies. So for the first 3 to 5 minutes of every presentation, I do that. And that keeps me centered in the room, because if I don't, I'll run. Because my anxiety is that high, even 10 years down the track, that by standing up in front of that room, I shouldn't be there. So I do that, and that keeps me centered. And by the time I get there, I've found rhythm. And then my purpose overtakes my anxiety. That's one of my strategies that I use to overcome that anxiety.
Your purpose.
Yeah. So my purpose then overtakes that, and then I'm away. And everything that comes out is right. Where if I don't keep myself either that, or I'll piss people off because I'm walking from one side of the stage at 100 miles an hour because I'm just about to explode, or I can use that strategy, and that just makes me. The other strategy that I use, which is really helpful. I'm an In Excess fan, mad In Excess fan. Michael Hutchence was the best thing since sliced bread. But if you read books about Michael, he was short-sighted and he couldn't see much further past the 7th or 10th row so he could be playing to 100,000 people at Wembley and could only see the front people. So what made him such a great front man is that every concert was intimate.
Yeah.
Because he could only see 150 people instead of the 150,000 people. So I use kind of a similar strategy, not that I'm short-sighted, but if I can find 4 people in the room that are resonating with my story at the start, that also is another strategy. And all of a sudden, it's not that everyone else becomes obsolete, but then I all of a sudden start having 4 conversations with 4 different people. So it makes you look like a shit-hot speaker because you're scanning the room, because you're going across the room. But it's all of a sudden, I know they're resonating. So then I'm focusing the conversation with them to keep me anchored in the room. And they're just a couple of little strategies, because the anxiety doesn't go for me. Like as this part, I still think I'm in grade 3 when I walk into a room and I get a bit overawed, particularly, like I said, you walk into a room and the other keynote speakers, Glenn McGrath or Wally Lewis, or, and you're going, what are you doing here? Yeah.
So do you think you're perhaps an introvert?
Oh, definite. I get told that by my wife all the time. So I'll go to our local footy and I like to be by myself. I don't like to engage in conversation, which is really totally different to what I do, because I'm there for a purpose. So I can't be that person in the corner when I go to a speaking gig. I'm there to inspire conversation.
I think with me, I'm a bit the same. I can talk to a group of people if I'm standing beside my camera and I'm holding onto the camera and I've got my RM boots on. I feel I'm grounded, I'm safe, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But take the camera away, put me up in front of a group of people, I'm shocking, I'm a mess. And don't put me in front of the camera.
Yeah.
I like hiding behind it.
Yeah. And that's really interesting as a speaker. If you said to me, right, Warren, let's go and do a 1-minute video outside. Yeah, hopefully you've got a half an hour, another 40 minutes, because it'll be, you're a bit, oh.
Actually, no, I've seen your video. It's really good how you present it.
But yeah, I've been seeing the phone is blown up because the memory is full because it's took 30 things to just go with one word. Like it's just like it's so hard. First time I ever did that, I did a speaking in Gunnedah, and I would do it was for before Ruralco become nutrient. They had a foundation. I was doing some talks for them, and it was a drought fund, and they said we want to do a bit of a thing. Well, I stood there, and you reckon I could get it out? And I've got all the videos, and it was like 30 minutes of me going, "G'day, it's Warren Davies." G'day, it's Warren Davies here. You know, like it's just, I delete them now, but look, I just keep recording these things to try and get out one, 40-minute, 40-second video, and it's just really hard. So I can do it in front of an audience, but when it's on the camera, I become really, kind of.
So at the end of your presentations, what do you hope sticks with your audience?
Well, the main thing is to make people think. That's really what I want them to do, is actually think about themselves or the people around them. But I leave 3 lessons with most audiences, and that's around communication, connection, and seeking help. So we've got to communicate. Like, we've got to talk about this stuff. One of the things that I learnt from my own journey is that if you don't talk to people about how you're feeling, they can't support you. So we need to talk about it, and we need to not worry about, it still happens today. Like if there's mental illness in the community or there's been a suicide, people go to ground, they don't talk, and we need to just talk about it like we talk about everything else. And it is a tough conversation. Like, I really wish that I was a comedian or talking about footy or something like that, but it's not. I'm a mental health speaker. Yeah. It's a tough gig. So you got to try and make the best of what you're talking about, but it's really tough for people to talk about. So trying to normalise those conversations is what I hope to achieve. So that comes from communication, but connection's so important.
Yeah.
Staying connected to your community, whatever that looks like to you, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's your footy club, whether it's people down the street. Some people pull me aside around this one, but if it's the blokes down the pub and that's your connection, well, you need to stay connected. You need to communicate with those people, because isolation's the biggest killer. But I'm also a great believer in the gold nugget that's attached to every community, and that's the shared wisdom. And this all stemmed from a conversation at the Summer Grains Conference on the Gold Coast I spoke at, and used that in excess strategy. I noticed there was a fella that was resonating, and at the end of it, he come up to me and he called me every F and C that he could possibly call me after the presentation. And I said, well, I'm Warren.
Yeah.
He goes, well, I'm George. And George was a 75-year-old cotton grower from out Chinchilla Way somewhere in Queensland. And he said, yeah, you're every name under the sun. Yeah. And I said, well, how come? He goes, you know that bit where you said thumbs up, thumbs down? He said, how the hell was I meant to walk out of this room in front of 500 people and give you the thumbs down and say I'm struggling? Because you just told my story.
Oh, really?
And I said, mate, I think you've missed the whole thing. Why couldn't you do that? That would have made you a leader. He goes, no, they would have thought I was a weak bastard. And I'm the best cotton grower in my area. And if I'd have done that, I would have lost my identity and credibility with those people. I said, no, I don't reckon. And so I challenged him that day. I said, you do me a favour. So I made, once again, light and shade. I said, I can see you're a tight ass, George. I said, but you're at a conference. You don't even have to buy the beer. Go and grab 3 beers and go and tell those 2 blokes that you were actually sitting with at the table, because I did see you, what you just told me. And the interesting thing I've come out of that conversation is that they come back to me 30 minutes later and said, George just told us his story. I said, yeah. And he goes, we had no idea. These blokes had lived next door to each other on neighbouring farms for the last 75 years, and they never have talked about it. Yeah. But the thing that was really, I suppose, the thing that really was the eye-opener from that conversation is that one of the guys, one of his mates, was also struggling with his mental health. They'd never talked about it.
He got talking as well. Mate, that is powerful.
The conversations are the important things, but having the courage to stick your hand up, where George wouldn't have walked out of that room. And mind you, he's about 6'5". He had the biggest hands I've ever seen on a bloke. He was a fairly big fella. He just couldn't and wouldn't have walked out of that room because he didn't want to lose his identity of the best cotton grower. Instead, now he's probably a mental health leader in his community because he stood up and and shared his story with his mates.
Yeah.
With nobody else, it doesn't matter. Now his mates know. So the whole bit around communication is now his mates know they can support him.
Yeah.
Before they didn't.
Yeah.
No, they would have you're just you're a weird cat. Like they would have thought. You never turn up to the footy, or when we go to the footy, you sit in the corner, you don't talk to anyone. But it's understanding what that person is and what they're going through. So it's understanding some of that stuff.
And I bet George is sleeping better at night himself.
I reckon he would be, because it's just, I reckon he would have got a round of applause if he had stood up in that room too and walked out, because everyone knew why. I'd already explained the thumbs up, thumbs down. So
yeah, bringing community back together. One of our previous legendary guests, Leela McDougall, who you know very well, she was big on that too, is bringing that community sense back together again. Yeah,
and I think it's something. Rural communities are a funny thing, and one of the things and why Leela and I've connected so well is the first time I seen the Just a Farmer movie was in the Shepparton Theatre by myself, and I cried the way through it because it's my story. And I keep saying, like, it's not, but it is. I feel like George. You just told my story. One of the funny things is around that is that rural communities are so powerful. They're such a powerful thing, but they're also so divisive as well, because small town gossip is, and in the movie it's depicted as this, and we've experienced that as well when we were leaving our farm, and some of the things that went around about you've gone broke. We hadn't gone broke. We'd made the decision to leave because we knew we were broken. Just interesting things.
And that movie we've talked about, Just a Farmer. If our listeners would like to know more about that, it's justafarmermovie.com, and you can either log on and watch the movie, or you can host a screening, and I recommend everyone to go and watch that. It's an amazing movie.
That's a very powerful movie. But bringing communities back together, because we pride ourselves on we're rural communities. And I heard it again this morning, and it's really interesting because it gets thrown around, and it generally happens in the media cycle, is that these New South Wales communities are so resilient, they're so powerful because they come together. But that's right at this stage. What happens in 1 month's time, in 2 months' time, in 3 months' time? And I've seen it happen in a lot of the communities that I work in, that communities come together. They're so powerful. And then all of a sudden they start to fracture a little bit. And then there's generally ends up being 3 distinct groups in every community. And they're the people that look like they're surviving, but deep down they're probably not. But they've got their head above water. They've got a good support network around them. They're going okay. But if you sit down and have a really vulnerable conversation, they're struggling. You've got people in the middle that are treading water. They're just struggling to keep their head above water. And then there's people that are completely drowning. And there's those 3 distinct groups in every community that I work in, especially in disaster recovery. And it's the same in the mental health space as well. There'll be people that you'll walk past and you go, they've got it all together. I wish I was like that. But they're not. You talk, everyone's got their challenges. And I think that's one of the greatest tools you can have, is to understand that everyone's got some sort of shit going on in their life. It just depends, how they're dealing with it, whether they're communicating, whether they're seeking help, or they just they're all over it, and then there's the ones that are just treading water, and they look like they're there but they're not there, like the proverbial duck. And then you've got people that are just completely drowning, and it's been able to help all 3 people. Like when organisations understanding that there's 3 groups in this town, everyone's struggling at some level, but obviously you want to get to the people that are drowning first, and work your way up. But everyone needs support, and so that's where empathy plays a big part. And I learnt this lesson during the bushfires, because I attended a community meeting at Sarsfield directly after the bushfires, and the lady that was in the most trauma in that room only had lost 3 rose bushes, where everyone else in that room had lost everything. But her survivor guilt was that strong that she could hardly stand up. And she needed just as much support as the old mate over here who'd lost everything and, lived in the same place for 50 years and had nothing. But that her pain was just as strong. So that was a great lesson to understand that. It'd be easy to say, what you got to worry about? You've only lost 3 rose bushes, where this guy's lost everything, or this lady's lost everything, or this young girl who come up and said, I had some wristbands, and she said, I've lost my wristband collection. So I just went and grabbed a bag of them out of the back of my car, and she had wristbands all up her arm that day. But just simple things like that. But she'd lost everything, where this lady had, had a singed lawn and 3 rose bushes gone. And it was just, that was a really awakening moment for me, working in that space, to know that everyone's struggling. It's just how they're struggling and how they're dealing with it and what we can do to support them.
Yeah, community is everything. And mate, you're involved in a lot of community groups, I believe. And one of them, you're an ambassador for the Cottage by the Sea at Queenscliff. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Cottage by the Sea, it's something that I've been an ambassador for over 10 years there now. Cottage by the Sea is a children's charity, but it's based in Queenscliff. So anyone that's not familiar, Queenscliff's like at the opening to Port Phillip Bay on the Geelong side of the bay. And kids get to go there and have a take a break camp where they go and spend a time at the cottage. And there are kids that have been identified that either socio-economic groups, or one of my roles as a regional ambassador is I've been fortunate enough to have kids from bushfire communities or flood communities go down to there just to have a break. Then there's the reef and mentoring program where kids get identified and they stay in the program right through to their finished high school. You never walk away from Cottage by the Sea without a smile on your face, and just some of the stories that come out of that place are just amazing. And the feedback you get, when you've heard a kid from just up the road here from a primary school goes down there and they'd never been to the beach before, and they walk into the cottage and then you walk out the back door and all you can see is Port Phillip Bay and the beach, and they just like a life-changing experience. So just love being involved with Cottage by the Sea as an ambassador. And once again, it's one of those pinch yourself moments, because other ambassadors like Paddy Dangerfield and Ian Cover and Curtis Stone, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm Warren from Tongala here. But it's just, everyone, you walk into Cottage, your egos and your banners get left at the gate, and you're just there for the right reasons. It's just a fantastic place. I'm also an ambassador, and just recently been appointed ambassador for the Blue Tree Project from Western Australia. So Kendall and I have done a fair bit of work together, and I did a bit of a tour over in Western Australia last year, and I'm going over there shortly to do another few days over there, and she's coming over this way. But the Blue Tree Project is something, before becoming an ambassador, is very special to me, because, as I said, doing some of this disaster recovery work, and particularly after the bushfires, and particularly in Corryong, is a town that I hold really close to my heart. And a few of the families there that I'd met post bushfires lost sons to suicide not long after the bushfires. And one of those families have got a blue tree on their property, and that tree is Sam's tree, named after their son. And it's something I'm really passionate about. And now to become an ambassador for Blue Tree Project, knowing the story, because it's Kendall lost her brother to suicide, and he'd painted a tree just as a practical joke out on their farm at Muckamboodin in the wheat belt of Western Australia.
Is that where the story started, the Blue Tree?
Yeah.
I've just read about that.
Yeah, so in Muckamboodin on the farm, out of Kendall's parents' farm, her brother and his friend had painted this tree, as a practical joke, just to get up Grant, Kendall's dad, because he'd asked him to clean the machinery shed up. And they painted this tree, and it wasn't brought to Kendall's attention because she was at boarding school until after her brother had passed away. So that sparked the whole thing, and it's just started with, and then a couple other mates painting another blue tree, and then eventually it just went viral, like all over social media, and now it's a global movement. So there's a blue tree on every continent in the world, including Antarctica.
This started from
one tree in Muckamboodin in Western Australia. Yeah, it's an amazing story. So to be an ambassador with that is just has blown me away, that they valued what I do enough to include me into such a great story, but such a great movement as well. And there's blue trees popping up everywhere, and a lot of people don't understand the story. And so the part of my job as an ambassador is to share that story and make sure that people understand, well, this is what it's about. It's about making sure people know that it's okay to reach out for help. And this is a sign of, that's a sign to remind you to have those conversations and to reach out and make sure people are looking after themselves, and so many meanings. Like I got a sign made for Sam's tree up in Kajua, and I wrote on it, and it's just got a heap of words what I thought it all meant for, you know, loss and grief, but also on the other side of it is hope and healing and all these things. There's lots of, but not every tree is a memorial tree. Like some are just like communities want to create that awareness in their town or in their community. They're not all memorial trees, but a lot are. And there's generally a story behind every tree. So that's been massive for me. And yeah, so try and get myself, and I've always been involved, like as a footy coach or on school council or whatever. I always tried to be involved in community, because one of the things that I lacked growing up as that kid was community, because we moved around a fair bit. So it's a really important part of my life now. So yeah, being involved is really great.
Well, you're giving a lot back, mate. So thank you. Now, I want to get to your amazing podcast, Beyond the Back Paddock.
Yep.
You have many incredible guests on your show.
Yeah, it's like a passion project, really. It was, as I said, like people have got a story who are there not to share it. So I bump into some really wonderful people in my journeys, and
Wally Lewis being one of them.
Yeah, the Wally Lewis being one, and you know, there's just, not even that. I think it's episode 7, I reckon. But that's Lucy's story, and Lucy was the catalyst for me to start my podcast, because Lucy was a young girl that I met at a speaking gig, and I was kind of at the stage where I thought this speaking stuff's just not turning out the way it's meant to, because I had this fandangled idea in my head that speaking was all about, you know, jet setting and you know, flash rooms, and you know, so use an example, like for any Victorians, they'll understand, like the Palladium room at Crown Casino. I thought that's what it's all about. And I'm speaking in paddocks on the side of the Snowy River in down on to dairy farmers in a paddock, or I'm thinking this isn't working out. And this event was in South Australia. I was combining two of my passions. It was a country football championship, and this young girl come up to me afterwards. But the funny thing is, I've been starstruck like I am, and an AFL nut. Tony Modra was at the same event, and I wanted to get a photo with Tony, so I'm standing right next to him wanting to get his photo, when Lucy come up to me and tapped me on the elbow and said, "Can I have a couple of minutes of your time?" Which ended up being like an hour-long conversation. Wow. And she shared her story, which first lesson out of that, I'm a dad, and I had a teenage daughter at home, and what Lucy shared with me, I wouldn't have thought my daughter would have even shared with me. So to gain the trust of someone, even like for Lucy, she was one of the waitresses at this event. So to gain that trust, and then to have a connection with her mum, who I've had this connection with her mum for about 6 years and only met her face to face for the first time a couple of weeks back in South Australia when I did a speaking gig. But to have this connection and follow her story, but understand where she was and the dark places that she was in. She was the catalyst behind me wanting to start this podcast. But then obviously you bump into all these other people along the way, and yeah, so it's a bit of fun. As I said, not the sharpest tool in the shed, and definitely not the technology guru of the world, but I still pop them out there. And I think a quote from one of my mentors pops into my head every time I press publish, is that we're not looking for perfection. We're looking to move forward here, and not perfection. We're looking for progress, not perfection. So I just keep pressing publish, and sometimes they're better and worse. It doesn't matter, but the story gets out there. So
well, I think you're doing a great job, mate. So that's Beyond the Back Paddock,
yep.
And that's on all the main podcast platforms.
Yep.
All right, Warren, now we're up to the fun part.
Yeah.
These are the off-the-wall questions.
These are the ones that I love giving to my guests on my podcast, and I've got no idea. So anyway, fire them at me, mate, and see how we go.
Answer as many as you like. What do people misunderstand about you most?
I think everyone thinks just because you're a speaker that you're an extrovert, and when you're totally not. Introvert, that's probably something that they misunderstand about me. And some people would say, people who know me from the past, he's a hothead, but it's understanding where I was at that stage. Yeah. So, but I think everyone would think I'm an extrovert where I'm not.
Well said. And if you could give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would you say?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I think just have confidence in yourself and have belief. Like, I think that's, pretty generic. I think everyone would say the same thing, but, at certain stages, around, maybe a little bit before I was 18, there would be some times I'd have no belief in, and it took like footy coaches, like a couple of people that I call my mentors in my life are some of my footy coaches. And it's because they had belief in me, and that gave myself belief in myself. So, but have some belief in yourself that you don't need someone else to tell you that you can do something if you,
Yeah, good on you, mate. What's the weirdest thing you've ever been asked at a keynote presentation or workshop?
Well, the funniest thing, not the weirdest, but the funniest thing is always I say that I failed to make the footy team at my school in Melbourne, which was a Catholic boys' school, and I asked the audience, "Well, what do you think? What sport did I represent that school at?" And one bloke yelled out one day, said ballroom dancing. I said, "Mate, it was an all boys school. Come on, get real." Like it was. So that's probably the funniest thing that I've ever been yelled out from an audience. But obviously in this space, it's always, if people want to ask questions, it's pretty deep, and it's, lots of people ask some really good questions, and that's, I think, then ticks off one of those boxes in my mission. I've inspired it, so that's good.
Good. What time of the day do you get your best work done?
Well, it's really interesting. Best time to get work is probably in the night time, but I get too tired. But I seem to be able to come up with some ideas in the night time, even if it's not sleeping, but in the night time, like I'll be darting backwards and forwards to my office, just writing things down, because I know by tomorrow morning they'll be gone. So I just write quick thing to jog my memory of, that's a bloody good idea. So probably night time's the best time.
Now, mate, dogs, cats, or something unexpected?
Definitely dogs.
Thank you.
Dogs play a big part in my support network, as well as, we've always been dog people. But look, once again, and I was probably just following my dad's lead. We've done everything. So dad's, had everything from milking goats to chooks. And I mean, not just have them, he showed them. Like he showed goats, he showed chooks, he showed pigeons. So as a kid growing up, I was a full-on pigeon racer. I very competitive. Prized possession at that stage was a pigeon that I bought off Bill Laurie. So his name was Bill. He was my prize first off racing and then breeding pigeon. So I spent $500 of hard earned to buy that pigeon off Bill. So pigeon racing was something pretty obscure, but dogs and obviously cows.
Billy Birmingham taught me about Bill's pigeons.
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
If you could have a coffee or a cold beer with anyone, who would you choose?
This is a really great question, because no one can answer this. I ask people if they can invite 5 people to have dinner with. There's one person I'd really love to sit down with and have a coffee with, and once again, life-changing moment. Football mad person. My dad and mum grew up in South Yarra, and the people in their neighbourhood that they kicked around with, and one of those guys was Kevin Sheedy.
He walked into our gym just 12 months ago.
And Dad always used to say, "Oh, we know Kevin." Mum would say, "Barbara and Patrick, that's his brother and sister." We used to know. I'd say, it's one of those stories. And I can remember as a 7-year-old kid at the Cabrini Hospital in Melbourne. I've got a really good memory, so that's something that I'm cursed or blessed with. So I can remember this as clear as a bell. Sitting in there, and my pop, who passed away a week or so later, was in intensive care. Dad walked in, and I can still remember they were the flippy doors, had round circle glass on them. Dad walked in the doors and they swung shut. So they flipped past, and once they stopped moving, they opened again. Bugging me dead, it was Kevin Sheedy. He walked out. And this is like, he's still at Richmond playing in his playing days. And he walked out and goes, "G'day, young fella." I can remember this conversation as clear as a bell. And he sat down next to me. He goes, "Who do you barrack for?" I said, "Richmond." He goes, "Whose number's on your back?" And I said, "Number 10. And he goes, "Good on you, young fella." And he goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm waiting for me dad. He's in seeing me pop." He says, "That's no good." Next minute, the doors open again. And they wouldn't have seen each other for 30 years probably. And he goes, "Ron Davies, what are you doing here?" And I thought, bug me dead, Dad does know him. And that was like life-changing thing. So I'd love to sit down with Kevin and share that story, because it's one of those stories that happens at Cottage by the Sea all the time, because the Geelong Footy Club have a bit to do with Cottage by the Sea, the AFL footballers. And because I'm an AFL nut, some people will disagree with me, but how much they actually do for people, and that was life changing for me. Really ignited my passion for football, and obviously Kevin Sheedy is just a friggin' freak of a person. So
he could be a good guest on Beyond the Back Paddock.
He would be a great guest. I'd love to be able to share that story with him. It's because it just as that young kid who was probably struggling with a bit at that stage, he just made my day, and it was something I'll never forget.
Now, last question, mate. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Now, this would be a photoshopped place because it'd have to include mountains down to the beach. Yeah. So I'm not very well travelled. I've never left the country. So that's...
Really?
Yeah, never left the country, but love Australia. So, if you could imagine somewhere like Lorne or, Polo Bay or somewhere like that, but in the tropics. Yeah, somewhere like that, just overlooking the ocean, but having the hills as well would be, it's probably not an actual location, more of a, get on Photoshop and put a bit of this and a bit of that. But definitely would have trees, mountains and ocean.
Nice. Well, Warren, I've seen some words that describe you, and I agree totally. And you've mentioned these words several times through our chat. Resilience, persistence, and determination. And you really care for rural communities and the health in particular for our Australian farmers. And I want to thank you very much for that, mate. And also thank you for this amazing chat.
No, I've loved sitting, actually first time. So this is a first time podcast guest where we're sitting face to face. So I really love this. We chat, there's nothing better than actually sitting face to face with someone and chewing the fat. So thanks very much.
That wraps up part B with Warren Davies. There's a lot to take away about vulnerability, connection, and the strength that comes from speaking up. Warren's work in mental health, his story, and his tools for resilience are helping to lift rural communities all across Australia. If this conversation resonated with you, please reach out to a mate, to a service, or to your community. No one has to do this alone. And if you'd like to find out more about Warren, search The Unbreakable Farmer. Thanks for listening, and keep looking out for one another.